Hey there, welcome to Broaderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. The woman in the window. Have you ever experienced that moment when everything feels off, but you can't quite put your finger on why? That was my first thought when I saw her. It was late, a typical weekday evening. I had just moved into a new apartment, nestled on the top floor of an old building on the edge of town. The place had charm, or so the landlord said, but all I saw were creaky floors, outdated fixtures, and an odd layout. There was something else, though, the window across from mine. I had barely unpacked, but I'd gotten into the habit of sitting by the window in the evenings, watching the city lights and letting my thoughts drift. The window in the opposite building was almost perfectly aligned with mine, just a few stories below. It was one of those rare setups where you could see directly into someone else's life, a guilty kind of voyeurism. At first, the window was always dark. No sign of life. But one evening, I noticed her. A woman. She was standing still, almost unnaturally so, staring out of her own window. She had long, dark hair that cascaded over her shoulders, and her face was pale, almost blending with the dim light of her apartment. I couldn't make out her features clearly, but I could tell she was looking straight at me. I laughed at myself, shaking off the odd sense of discomfort. People look out windows all the time, right? But as I continued my evening ritual, I noticed that she was always there, every time I glanced over. And it wasn't just that she was looking, it was the way she mimicked my movements. When I leaned forward, she leaned forward. When I rested my chin on my hand, she did the same. It was uncanny. I tried not to think too much of it at first. Maybe it was just a coincidence, or maybe she was bored like me, finding amusement in the silent connection between our windows. But something about her unnerved me. Her movements were too synchronized, too deliberate. There was no flicker of amusement in her posture, no sign that she even realized what she was doing. She was like a mirror, a living, breathing reflection. Days passed, and the more I observed her, the stranger things became. I began to test her. I'd make sudden gestures, scratch my head, wave, even knock on my window. And every time, she would follow, her actions eerily precise, as if she knew exactly what I was going to do before I did it. It got to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. One night, after another unsettling session of our strange mimicry, I closed the curtains. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want to know if she was still standing there, copying my every move. But the next night, curiosity got the better of me. I peeked out, half expecting her to be gone, but no, there she was, standing perfectly still, gazing directly at me. This time, though, something was different. She wasn't mimicking me anymore. She was smiling. The smile chilled me to the bone. It wasn't a friendly smile, it was cold, unsettling, as if she knew something I didn't. I stepped back from the window, pulling the curtain closed again with a shaky hand. My heart pounded in my chest. It's just in your head, I told myself. You're tired. She's just some bored woman. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I had seen people smile before, casual, warm, or even distant smiles, but this one was different. There was something off about her expression, a tension in her face that didn't feel human. It was as if her features were trying to mimic a smile, but something inside was twisted, making it all wrong. I barely slept that night, every creak and groan of the apartment setting my nerves on edge. When I finally drifted off, I dreamt of the woman. In my dream, she was still standing in the window, but her smile had grown wider, unnatural, stretching too far across her face. Her eyes never left mine. The next day, I tried to go about my routine as if nothing had happened. I went to work, had lunch with a friend, and told myself not to think about her. It worked for most of the day, until I returned home and sat by the window again. The city looked the same as always, the streets below bustling with cars, people hurrying along the sidewalks, unaware of the strange connection forming between me and the woman across the way. I hesitated before looking over at her window. Part of me wanted to believe she wouldn't be there, that whatever had happened last night was just a trick of my tired mind. But when I glanced over, there she was, waiting. This time, though, she wasn't mimicking me. She wasn't even looking at me. She was moving on her own, slowly pacing back and forth in front of her window. Her smile was gone, replaced by a blank, almost lifeless expression. I felt a pang of relief. Maybe she wasn't obsessed with copying me after all. Maybe it had all been a coincidence. But as I watched her, I noticed something strange. Her movements were stiff, jerky, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. She didn't seem like a real person anymore. I turned away, trying to focus on something else. But no matter how hard I tried, my thoughts kept drifting back to her. Every time I glanced back at the window, she was still there, pacing, never looking up at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was happening, something I couldn't explain. That night, I made a decision. I had to confront her. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in some bizarre game with a woman I didn't even know. If she was playing some kind of prank, I needed to put an end to it. I threw on my jacket and left my apartment, heading toward the building across the street. My heart raced as I approached the entrance. The place looked abandoned, the windows were dark, the walls cracked and peeling. I wondered how anyone could live here. The elevator wasn't working, so I took the stairs, climbing each step with growing unease. By the time I reached the floor where I thought her apartment was, I was drenched in sweat. The hallway was dimly lit, the air heavy with the smell of mildew. I found the door to what I thought was her apartment and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time, but still nothing. For a moment, I considered turning back. Maybe this was a mistake. But then, to my horror, the door creaked open on its own, revealing a dark, empty room. I stepped inside, my breath catching in my throat. The apartment was bare, as if no one had lived there in years. Dust covered the floor, and the only sound was the faint creaking of the building settling around me. But then, I saw it, the window. The same window I'd been watching for days. It was there, right in front of me. And standing in front of it, perfectly still, was the woman. But she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the window, her reflection in the glass mirroring her blank stare. I backed away, my mind racing. There was no way she could be real. No one could live in this place, and yet there she was, as solid as the ground beneath me. Suddenly, her head jerked toward me, her eyes locking onto mine. Her expression changed in an instant, the same unnerving smile creeping across her face. I turned and ran. I slammed the door behind me, my pulse thundering in my ears. My legs felt weak, and my hands shook as I raced down the stairs, the cold, damp air clinging to my skin. I couldn't stop picturing her face, that smile, the way it twisted as if she was enjoying every second of my fear. By the time I made it back to my apartment, I could barely breathe. I locked the door behind me, double-checking it, then dragged a chair over and wedged it under the knob for good measure. I leaned against the wall, trying to calm myself, but the panic was overwhelming. I couldn't make sense of what had just happened. The woman, she couldn't be real. There was no way. Her apartment was abandoned, lifeless. And yet I had seen her, standing there, as real as the world outside my window. The hours passed slowly, the shadows in my apartment growing longer as the night crept in. I couldn't bring myself to look out the window again. I didn't want to know if she was there, waiting. But the silence was suffocating. I had to do something. I picked up my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found my friend Alex. He'd think I was crazy, but I needed to talk to someone to explain what had been happening. Maybe he'd help me make sense of it. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Hey, man, what's up?" Alex's voice was casual, unaware of the terror that had gripped me for days. "Alex," I hesitated, unsure of how to start. "Something's been happening. I don't know how to explain it, but there's this woman across the street from my apartment. She's been copying me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Copying you? Like, what, some sort of prank?" Alex chuckled, but there was confusion in his voice. "No, it's not a prank. I don't think she's normal. She moves like she's imitating me, but now it's worse. I went to her apartment, Alex. It's empty. But she's still there." The line went silent. I could hear Alex breathing, as if he were trying to process what I was saying. "Dude, you sure you're not just imagining things? You've been stressed lately. New place, new job, maybe it's getting to your head." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to write it off as some stress-induced hallucination, but I couldn't. I had seen her, felt her presence. This wasn't just in my head. "I don't know," I finally replied. "But it feels real. Too real." Alex sighed. "Look, just get some sleep. You're overthinking this. I'll come by tomorrow, and we'll check it out together, all right? Maybe it's some reflection or weird optical illusion." I muttered a wikiat before hanging up, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Sleep was out of the question that night. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, every creak of the apartment making me flinch. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up to the sound of tapping. Soft, rhythmic tapping. I froze. It was coming from the window. My heart hammered in my chest as I slowly sat up, my eyes locked on the drawn curtains. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate, like fingers drumming on the glass. I didn't want to look. I couldn't. But the sound wouldn't stop. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I approached the window. The room was dark, and the only light came from the faint glow of the street lamp outside, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I reached for the edge of the curtain, my fingers trembling as I pulled it back. She was there. Standing on the other side of the glass, her face inches from mine. Her eyes were wide, her pupils too large, reflecting the dim light in a way that made them look almost empty. And that smile, it was even worse up close, her lips stretched too far, her teeth bared in a way that looked unnatural, like she was trying too hard to mimic a human expression. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The tapping stopped as soon as she saw me, her hand slowly lowering from the window. But she didn't move away. She just stood there, staring, her head slightly tilted to the side as if she was studying me. Panic surged through me. I backed up until I hit the wall, my body trembling uncontrollably. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from her. Then, she did something that made my blood run cold. She raised her hand and slowly pointed toward my door. My heart stopped. I turned my head, staring at the door, fear gripping me like a vice. There was a soft knock. The knock echoed through the apartment, low and deliberate. My heart raced so violently I thought it might burst from my chest. I turned back to the window, but she was gone. The space outside was empty, nothing but the usual dull glow of streetlights and the distant hum of the city. I stood frozen in place, staring at the door. The knock came again, this time a little louder, more insistent. It's impossible, I thought. I had just seen her outside the window. There was no way she could be at my door. But that didn't matter, someone was there, and I had no idea what would happen if I opened it. I moved toward the door slowly, each step weighted with dread. My body was acting on its own, some morbid curiosity pushing me forward when every instinct screamed for me to run. The chair was still wedged under the doorknob, and as I reached it, I stood there for a moment, my hand hovering over the knob. The knocking stopped. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to stretch on forever. My apartment was so quiet that I could hear my own ragged breaths, each one cutting through the stillness like a knife. Then, a whisper. It came from the other side of the door, soft but unmistakable. My name. Open the door. I recoiled, my back pressing against the wall. My mind was spinning. The voice was familiar, it was mine. I stood there, paralyzed by fear, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was it some kind of trick? A hallucination? But no matter how much I wanted to believe it wasn't real, I couldn't ignore the voice. It was identical to mine, down to the rhythm and tone. The voice whispered again, coaxing, calm. Come on, open it. I didn't move. My legs were weak, my hands slick with sweat. I was shaking uncontrollably, but I knew I couldn't open that door. Whatever was on the other side, it wasn't me, and it wasn't human. The whisper faded, replaced by another soft knock. Then, after what felt like an eternity, I heard footsteps moving away from the door, growing fainter until they disappeared completely. I waited, barely daring to breathe, my body still pressed against the wall. The air felt thick, oppressive, and the weight of the silence hung over me like a shroud. Minutes passed, maybe hours, I couldn't tell. Eventually, my exhaustion caught up with me, and I slid down the wall, curling into myself on the cold floor. Sleep was impossible, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I just stayed there, trembling, waiting for the next knock that never came. By morning, the daylight creeping through the edges of my curtains brought a small sense of relief, though it did nothing to erase the terror of the night. I forced myself to stand, every muscle aching as I stumbled into the bathroom. My reflection in the mirror was pale, hollow-eyed, a stranger staring back at me. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shake off the lingering fear. My mind replayed the events over and over, but no matter how I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't. The voice, the knock, it was real. I had to get out of here. Without a second thought, I grabbed my phone and texted Alex. I needed him to come over, to help me figure this out. I couldn't be alone anymore. As I waited for his response, I paced the apartment, every creak of the floorboards setting my nerves on edge. Finally, my phone buzzed. It was Alex. Be there in 15 minutes. Hang tight. I exhaled in relief. Just the thought of having someone else here was enough to keep the panic at bay, if only for a little while. 15 minutes stretched on like an eternity. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting to hear another knock or see her face staring back at me through the window. But nothing happened. The apartment remained eerily quiet. When the knock finally came, I jumped, my body tensing instinctively. But it wasn't the soft, deliberate tapping from last night. This was a quick, impatient rapping, Alex's usual knock. I rushed to the door and pulled it open, almost collapsing with relief while I saw him standing there, his familiar grin easing some of my fear. "Hey, man. You look like you haven't slept in days." Alex's expression shifted from amused to concerned as he took in my appearance. "What the hell happened?" I didn't answer right away, just stepped aside to let him in, closing the door quickly behind him. As soon as he was inside, I blurted out everything, the woman, the mimicry, the knock at my door, the voice. Alex listened, his expression growing more serious as I went on. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, pacing the room as he processed everything. "Okay," he said finally, "this is weird. Really weird. But we'll figure it out." He glanced toward the window, his brow furrowed. "You sure this woman wasn't just messing with you? Maybe there's some trick to it, reflections or something." "I don't know," I admitted, my voice shaky. "But I saw her last night, Alex. I heard her at my door. It's not just reflections." He nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "All right, let's go check out her place again. Maybe we missed something last night." I didn't want to go back, but I knew we had to. I couldn't keep living in fear of whatever was happening. Together, we left my apartment, heading once again toward the building across the street. As we approached her door, I braced myself for what we might find. But when we stepped inside, the apartment was exactly as I had left it, empty, abandoned. Dust hung in the air, and the silence was deafening. "There's no one here," Alex said, his voice echoing in the empty room. "It's a dead end." But just as he turned to leave, something caught my eye, a reflection in the window. Her, standing in my apartment. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. There, in the reflection of the window, was the woman standing in my apartment. She was facing the door, her back to the window, but I could see her unmistakable figure. Her hair hung limply, her posture unnaturally still, as if she were waiting for something. "Alex," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He didn't notice the panic in my tone at first. "What is it?" he asked, stepping toward me. I pointed to the window, unable to form the words. When he followed my gaze, his face fell. For a long moment, we both stood there in silence, staring at the reflection. There was no mistaking it, she was inside my apartment. "How is that possible?" Alex muttered, taking a step back. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by the same fear that had been gripping me for days. "We need to leave," I said, my voice shaky but firm. I didn't care how it was happening, I just knew that we had to get out of there. Whatever was going on, it was beyond our understanding, and I wasn't about to confront it head on. But as we turned to leave, the door to the empty apartment slammed shut with a deafening bang. I jumped, my heart pounding in my ears. Alex cursed under his breath, yanking at the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. We were trapped. I spun around, my eyes darting between the window and the door. The woman was still in the reflection, unmoving, but now her head was slightly tilted, as if she were listening to a struggle. A chill ran down my spine. Let me try. I pushed Alex aside, my hand shaking as I grabbed the doorknob and twisted. Nothing. It was as if the door had sealed itself shut, trapping us in this nightmare. Are the windows open? Alex asked, his voice tight with fear. I shook my head, knowing what he was about to suggest. The windows in this building were old, heavy, and likely painted shut. We wouldn't be able to escape that way. Suddenly, a low creak echoed through the room. Both of us turned toward the source of the sound, the window. The woman was moving. Slowly, methodically, she was turning around to face us. Her movements were jerky, like a poorly controlled puppet, her limbs stiff and unnatural. When her face came into view, that smile returned, wider than ever, stretching too far across her face. Alex stumbled back, his eyes wide with horror. What the hell is this? I couldn't answer. My mind was racing, trying to find some explanation, but nothing made sense. The reflection shouldn't be able to move on its own, shouldn't be aware of us. And yet, here she was, watching us, that twisted grin growing more grotesque by the second. Suddenly, the lights in the apartment flickered, plunging us into brief darkness before sputtering back on. When the light returned, the woman in the reflection was no longer at the window. She was behind us. I felt the blood drain from my face as I spun around. She stood in the corner of the room, still smiling, her eyes locked onto mine. Her body was distorted, like a figure in a funhouse mirror, her limbs too long, her posture unnatural. She didn't move, but I could feel the weight of her presence, suffocating and oppressive. We need to get out, Alex said through gritted teeth, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my mind racing for a solution. There was no way out, the door wouldn't open, and we were trapped in this rotting, empty apartment with her. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely think straight, but I had to do something. I couldn't just wait here and hope she didn't attack. Without thinking, I grabbed Alex's arm and pulled him toward the window. Break it, I whispered. We'll climb out. Alex looked at me like I was insane, but he nodded. He grabbed a chair and, with a single motion, hurled it at the window. The glass shattered, the sound of breaking glass echoing through the empty building. But before we could make a move, she was there. In the blink of an eye, the woman was standing between us and the shattered window, her face mere inches from mine. Her smile had disappeared, replaced by an expression of cold, emotionless hatred. Her hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with a strength that didn't seem possible. Her grip was ice cold, like death itself, and her touch sent a shock of pain up my arm. I screamed, trying to pull away, but she held me firmly in place, her eyes boring into mine. Alex shouted something, but his voice was distant, drowned out by the pounding of my heart in my ears. The world seemed to blur around me, the edges of my vision darkening as I struggled to free myself from her grasp. Then, as suddenly as she had grabbed me, she let go. I stumbled back, gasping for breath, my wrist throbbing where her fingers had touched. Alex grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the window, and together we clambered out onto the fire escape, the cold night air hitting us like a slap to the face. We didn't stop. We scrambled down the fire escape as fast as we could, nearly tripping over each other in our rush to get away from that cursed apartment. When we finally reached the ground, I collapsed onto the pavement, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. Alex was breathing heavily beside me, his eyes wide, still in shock from what we had just experienced. Neither of us said anything. There was nothing to say. We had escaped. But I knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. As I lay there, staring up at the night sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still watching me, waiting for the moment I would look into the glass again. The night air did little to calm me. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I sat on the cold pavement, trying to catch my breath. Alex was beside me, hunched over, still panting from the adrenaline rush. The silence between us was thick with unspoken terror. For a long while, neither of us moved. It was as if we both feared that any sudden motion would draw her back, somewhere from the shadows where she waited. The fire escape clanged above us in the breeze, but all I could think of was the woman. She had reached for me. She had touched me. And it wasn't just her presence that terrified me now, it was what came with it. The cold, the weight of her fingers, the sickening certainty that she could have done more. Let's go, Alex finally said, his voice strained and shaky. We can't stay here. I nodded, barely able to stand. We walked in silence, keeping our eyes away from every window we passed. I felt like the whole world had shifted, that every reflective surface might hold a glimpse of her twisted figure, waiting for me to make the mistake of looking. Back at my apartment, I wanted to collapse into bed, but I couldn't bring myself to go inside. There was a deep-rooted dread growing in me, a certainty that she wasn't done with me. I felt her presence, even from the street. My apartment window was dark, the curtains drawn, but I knew she was there, lurking just beyond the glass. I can't stay here, I whispered to Alex, more to myself than to him. Alex nodded, rubbing his face with both hands. We'll figure something out. Maybe you can crash at my place for a few days. His voice was laced with concern, but even he didn't sound convinced. He had seen her too, the impossible, the unnatural, and we both knew that hiding wouldn't be enough. We made our way back to Alex's place, his apartment in the quieter part of town. It felt safer there, farther from the buildings and the reflective windows that had become a trap for me. Inside, the space felt normal, warm, comforting even. But the feeling of safety was fleeting. I could still feel her presence, gnawing at the edges of my awareness. I tried to distract myself. Alex put on some music, made coffee, anything to fill the silence, but nothing worked. My mind kept circling back to the same question: what was she? And more importantly, what did she want? Late that night, long after Alex had gone to bed, I sat alone in his living room, staring at the blank television screen. It was a foolish mistake, I knew, but I couldn't help it. I had to know if she would follow me here, if she could find me beyond the boundaries of my apartment. My reflection stared back at me from the dark screen, tired, haggard. For a moment, there was nothing unusual. Just my own face, distorted by exhaustion. And then she appeared. It was faint, just behind my reflection, but there was no mistaking it. She was there again, standing in the same stiff, unnatural posture, her eyes locked onto mine through the glass of the TV. I stumbled back, knocking over the coffee table, my heart racing as panic surged through me. How is she here? I didn't dare look again, but I didn't need to. I could feel her, even now, lurking just beyond the surface of the screen. The room seemed colder, the air thick with her presence. I backed out of the living room, trying to keep my movements calm and quiet. My body felt heavy, like I was walking through water, and every instinct told me to run, but where could I go? She had followed me here, beyond my apartment, beyond the windows. If she could find me in Alex's apartment, then there was no escaping her. I retreated to the guest bedroom and locked the door behind me, though I knew it was a useless gesture. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Alex, who was still sleeping in the next room. "You alright?" I didn't respond. I couldn't tell him what I had seen again. He already thought I was losing it, and maybe I was. But deep down, I knew this was real. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the apartment, every distant sound, jolted me awake, and every time I opened my eyes, I expected to see her standing in the room, her eyes watching me from the dark. Morning came too slowly. When I finally dragged myself out of bed, I felt like a hollow shell, drained of every bit of energy I had. Alex was already up, pacing the kitchen when I walked in. He glanced at me, his face a mask of worry. "I had a weird dream last night," he said, his voice quiet. "I saw her. She was in my dream, standing in the reflection of my TV. I thought it was just from everything you told me, but now I'm not so sure." I stopped in my tracks, a chill running down my spine. "You saw her? Last night?" Alex nodded slowly. It felt so real. I woke up sweating, but I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. He looked up, meeting my gaze. "But if you're seeing her too..." I didn't need to say anything. We both knew. She was here, not just in my life, but in Alex's now, too. Somehow, she had reached beyond the confines of my apartment, and she wasn't going to stop. "What do we do?" Alex asked, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we couldn't stay here. We couldn't hide forever. And wherever we went, she would follow. I glanced at the window, half expecting to see her face staring back at me from the glass. "We need to find out what she wants," I said finally, the words tasting like lead in my mouth. Alex looked at me, his expression grim. "How do we even begin?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But we're running out of time." The next morning felt different, as if some unseen force had shifted the air around us. The tension was suffocating, and though we had made it through the night, I knew that wasn't a victory. We were running from something we couldn't explain, something that was closing in on us. Alex had suggested we look for answers. We couldn't just stay cooped up, waiting for her to come back. I agreed, but I had no idea where to even begin. There was no logical explanation for what was happening, nothing that made sense. But if she was following me, if she could reach beyond my apartment, then there had to be some reason behind it. "Let's start with the building," I said, sipping the black coffee Alex had made. It was cold, bitter, but it gave me enough focus to think. Maybe there's some history we don't know. Something that could explain why this is happening. Alex nodded, his eyes bloodshot from the sleepless night. "It's an old building, yeah. But we've both lived there for a while." "Why now? Why you?" That was the question that gnawed at me. What had changed? Why had she appeared in my life? It didn't feel random, but I couldn't think of anything I had done differently. The idea that this nightmare was targeted, that I had somehow invited her in, terrified me. We spent hours combing through old articles, local history forums, and anything we could find about the building. I barely blinked as I scrolled through pages of text, my mind racing through every possibility. But there was nothing. No reports of strange happenings, no mention of deaths or tragedies that might explain the presence of a ghostly woman in the window. As the hours passed, I started to feel hopeless. There had to be something. But the deeper we dug, the clearer it became that this wasn't about the building, it was about me. I don't get it, Alex said, tossing his phone onto the table in frustration. This doesn't make any sense. We're not dealing with a haunted building. This thing, it's something else. I felt the same frustration bubbling up inside me, threatening to overwhelm my already fragile sense of reality. What if it's not just about where I live? I said, the words spilling out before I could think. What if it's about me? Alex turned to me, frowning. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, the realization slowly forming in my mind. I saw her that first night, but I didn't just see her, I interacted with her. She copied me, mimicked my movements. I don't think she was there for anyone else. It was like she was drawn to me. Alex's face darkened as he absorbed the implication. But why? You've never done anything to invite something like this. We haven't messed with the occult or opened some cursed box. Why would she be attached to you? I didn't have an answer, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. There was something about my reflection that had caught her attention, something that had made her break free from whatever boundaries she was bound to before. I stared at my reflection in the dark screen of the TV again, this time with a growing dread. What if she wasn't just an external force? What if, somehow, she was connected to me, to the person I saw every day in the glass? The thought was horrifying, but I couldn't shake it. We need help, Alex said suddenly, breaking the heavy silence. There has to be someone who can tell us what's going on. Someone who deals with this kind of thing. A psychic? I asked, raising an eyebrow. It sounded ridiculous, but at this point, what other option do we have? Alex shrugged. Maybe. Or some kind of paranormal investigator. I know it sounds crazy, but we need to do something before this thing escalates. It felt like we were grasping at straws, but I agreed. If she could reach me anywhere, then I had no choice but to figure out what she wanted. And if that meant turning to people who dealt with the supernatural, then so be it. We spent the next few hours reaching out to local psychics and paranormal investigators, combing through online forums and making phone calls. Most of them sounded like frauds, people more interested in money than actually helping. But then we found one that seemed different. Her name was Maria. She specialized in hauntings and claimed to have years of experience dealing with spirits that cross over into our world. I was skeptical, but something in her voice when we spoke on the phone made me believe she could help. She asked questions that no one else had thought to ask about my emotions, my stress levels, and whether anything had changed in my life recently. I hadn't thought of it, but she seemed to believe that emotions played a key role in why spirits attach themselves to certain people. I'll meet you at your apartment tomorrow, she said, her voice calm, almost soothing. And we'll get to the bottom of this. But remember, these things are not always as they appear. Be ready for the truth. Her words left me uneasy. What truth could there be that I wasn't already seeing? That night, Alex stayed at my side, refusing to leave me alone. The woman hadn't appeared again, but I could feel her presence lingering, always just out of sight. My reflection had become a prison, and every reflective surface was a threat. As the hours dragged on, the tension between us grew. Neither of us spoke about it, but we both knew that tomorrow would be the turning point. Whatever Maria would find in my apartment, whatever truths she would reveal, would either free me from this nightmare or trap me deeper within it. Before I went to bed, I caught one last glimpse of myself in the bathroom mirror. For a second, I saw my own tired eyes, my reflection distorted by the dim light. But then, there she was, standing in the doorway behind me, her smile wider than before, her eyes gleaming with something dark, something malicious. I shut off the light and left the room without looking back. Tomorrow, everything would change. The next day arrived too quickly. Sleep had evaded me the entire night, my mind consumed with thoughts of what Maria would uncover. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was nearing the edge of something, that the truth, whatever it was, would either set me free or break me entirely. Alex and I met Maria outside my apartment. She was a tall, slender woman with dark hair and sharp, focused eyes. Her presence was calm, yet there was a gravity to her that immediately commanded respect. She carried a small bag with her, tools of her trade, I assumed, and greeted us with a nod, no small talk, no pleasantries. "Show me where it all started," she said, her voice even, businesslike. We led her upstairs to my apartment. As soon as we stepped inside, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air was heavier, more oppressive than before. Maria seemed to notice too, her eyes scanning the room, her expression unreadable. "It's here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something very old. Very attached." She turned to me, studying my face for a moment. "You're the key. Whatever this is, it's drawn to you, not just the space. I'll need you to participate in the process." My heart raced at her words, but I nodded. "What do I need to do?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled a small mirror from her bag and handed it to me. "Hold this. Look into it." I took the mirror, my hands trembling. The polished surface reflected my face back at me, and for a moment, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. But then, just like every other time before, she appeared. The woman. Her dark eyes stared back at me from behind my reflection, but this time she was closer, much closer. Maria noticed the shift in my expression immediately. "She's here, isn't she?" I nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight with fear. "She's been feeding off you," Maria said, her voice grim. "Your fear, your emotions. That's why she's grown stronger, why she can follow you beyond this place." Alex stood behind us, his face pale. "What is she? Can we stop her?" Maria turned to him, her expression darkening. "She's a reflection, not just in a literal sense, but a reflection of something buried deep inside you," she said, glancing back at me. "This kind of entity latches onto unresolved emotions, traumas. It's like a mirror, showing you the parts of yourself you've refused to confront." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. A reflection of me? But why now? I asked, my voice shaky. Why did she appear? I haven't done anything, nothing's changed. Maria paused, her eyes narrowing as if searching for something in me. "That's where you're wrong," she said slowly. "Something has changed. Something you may not even be fully aware of yet." I stared at her, confused, but before I could ask what she meant, the mirror in my hands grew cold. The woman behind my reflection was moving now, her eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "She's getting stronger," Maria said urgently. "We need to act fast." She pulled a small, thin blade from her bag and handed it to me. "You have to cut through the connection. It's symbolic, a severance. But only you can do it." I looked at the blade, then back at the mirror. The woman was still there, closer than ever, her face distorted, her mouth opening in a silent scream. My hand shook as I raised the blade, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to confront whatever this was, but I had no choice. I can't, I whispered, my voice breaking. What if it doesn't work? What if it makes her worse? Maria's voice was calm but firm. If you don't do this now, she will consume you. She's feeding off your fear. The longer you wait, the stronger she becomes. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. The blade felt heavy in my hand, the cold steel pressing into my palm. And then I opened my eyes again and faced her, my reflection, my shadow, my fear. With one swift motion, I sliced the blade across the surface of the mirror. The glass shattered in my hands. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Time stopped. The shards of glass hung suspended in the air, catching the dim light as they spun around me. And then I felt it, a rush of cold air, a presence leaving my body, being torn away from me. I fell to the ground, gasping for breath as the room spun around me. My vision blurred, my heart pounding in my chest. Alex was at my side in an instant, his hands gripping my shoulders, shaking me gently. Are you okay? What happened? I blinked, trying to focus, trying to make sense of what had just occurred. I looked down at the shattered pieces of the mirror, now lying on the floor like a puzzle that had been broken beyond repair. But she was gone. For the first time in days, I didn't feel her presence lurking in the corners of my mind. The oppressive weight that had followed me everywhere had lifted, like a dark cloud finally dispersing. Maria knelt beside me, her eyes softening. It's over. I wanted to believe her, but something still nagged at the back of my mind. The image of the woman, her distorted face, her eyes that had stared so deeply into mine. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Was she really just a reflection of me? I asked quietly, my voice trembling. Maria hesitated, her gaze drifting to the broken mirror on the floor. Not just of you, she said finally, but of what you've been hiding. The parts of yourself you refuse to confront, your fear, your guilt, your unresolved pain. I sat there in silence, her words echoing in my mind. She had been right all along. The woman in the window wasn't just an external force. She had been a manifestation of something far darker, something that had lived inside me for far longer than I had realized. Alex helped me to my feet, his expression filled with relief, but I couldn't bring myself to feel the same. The weight of everything that had happened still clung to me like a shadow. As we left the apartment, Maria turned to me one last time. Remember, the reflection may be gone, but the things she showed you are still there. You'll need to face them eventually. I nodded, though the thought of it terrified me. I had survived the woman in the window, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to confront what she had truly represented. As we stepped outside into the bright morning light, I couldn't help but glance at the windows around me, half expecting to see her face one last time. But there was nothing. Just my own reflection staring back at me, tired, broken, but still alive. For now. Island of Fear. Have you ever felt truly isolated, cut off from the world, with no escape? My name is Emily, and I want to tell you about the most terrifying experience of my life, a trip to an island that should have been an adventure but quickly became a nightmare. It was supposed to be the perfect getaway. My friends, Jason, Lily, and Matt, and I had been planning a camping trip for months, and we finally settled on a secluded island off the coast, a place called Blackstone Isle. It was small and completely deserted, the perfect spot for some peace and quiet. We rented a small boat and set out one morning, the sun shining and the water calm. The ride over was easy, and as we approached the island, it looked just as we'd imagined: dense trees, rocky shores, and no signs of civilization. We were all excited to set up camp and explore. "This place is amazing," Jason said as we pulled the boat up onto the shore. "It's like we have the whole world to ourselves." "Yeah, it's perfect," Lily agreed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "No noise, no crowds, just us in nature." Matt was already unloading the supplies, eager to get the tents up before sunset. "Let's get settled in," he said, nodding toward a clearing near the edge of the trees. "We've got plenty of time to explore tomorrow." As we set up camp, I couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. The island was beautiful, but there was something about its stillness that made me feel watched. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment I thought I saw something move among the shadows. I shook it off, telling myself it was just the isolation getting to me. We spent the afternoon exploring the beach, gathering firewood, and laughing around the campfire as the sun began to set. The sky turned a deep orange, and the sound of the waves lapping against the shore was peaceful. But as the darkness crept in, the atmosphere changed. The island, which had seemed so inviting during the day, now felt cold and unwelcoming. "It's getting dark fast," Lily said, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. "We should probably stay close to the fire." "Yeah, we don't want to get lost," Matt added, throwing another log onto the flames. As we sat around the fire, talking and joking, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The trees surrounding our campsite seemed to loom closer, their branches swaying in the wind, casting long, dark shadows. I kept glancing toward the forest, half expecting to see something or someone watching us. "Do you guys hear that?" Jason asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "Hear what?" I replied, my heart skipping a beat. "I don't know." "I thought I heard something in the trees," he said, his voice uncertain. We all fell silent, listening. At first, there was nothing but the sound of the wind and the crackling fire. But then, faintly, I heard it too, a rustling noise, like something moving through the underbrush just beyond the edge of the firelight. "Probably just an animal," Matt said, though his voice lacked confidence. "Yeah, probably," I agreed, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I glanced at Lily, who was sitting next to me, and saw the unease in her eyes. She felt it too. "Let's not get paranoid," Jason said, forcing a laugh. "We're alone out here, remember?" But as the night wore on, the rustling continued, and I began to notice something else, shadows moving between the trees. At first, I thought it was just the firelight playing tricks on me, but as I stared into the darkness, I saw it again, something, or someone, shifting among the trees, watching us. "There's something out there," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You're just spooking yourself, Matt said, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "I'm serious," I insisted, my heart racing. "Look over there, between the trees." Jason stood up, squinting into the darkness. "There's nothing there," he said, though his voice wavered slightly. But I knew what I had seen. And I wasn't the only one. Lily was staring into the same spot, her face pale. "I saw it too," she whispered. Suddenly, the rustling grew louder, and we all turned toward the sound. The trees swayed, their branches creaking, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure, tall, shadowy, standing just beyond the firelight, watching us. "What the hell is that?" Jason muttered, taking a step back. Before anyone could answer, the figure disappeared into the trees, leaving us in stunned silence. "Okay, that was not an animal," Matt said, his voice filled with tension. "We need to be careful." The atmosphere had shifted completely. The island, once a place of adventure, now felt dangerous. And as we huddled closer to the fire, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, more oppressive. Whoever, or whatever, was out there, it wasn't going away. And it was getting closer. The fire crackled softly as we sat in tense silence, our eyes darting toward the trees, trying to catch any sign of movement. The shadows danced and shifted, making it impossible to tell if something was out there or if it was just our imaginations playing tricks on us. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just in my head. I had seen the figure, and I wasn't the only one. "I don't like this," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "I feel like we're being watched." "I know," I said, glancing around nervously. "Something's out there." Jason shook his head, but he couldn't hide the fear in his eyes. "We've probably just freaked ourselves out. Maybe it was the wind or..." A loud crack echoed from the trees, cutting him off. We all jumped, our hearts racing. The sound was too close, too deliberate to be the wind. It was like someone had stepped on a branch, watching us from just beyond the firelight. "Did you hear that?" Matt asked, his voice shaking. We all nodded, eyes locked on the darkness, waiting for something to emerge. What if there's someone else on the island?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe we're not alone." "No way," Jason said, but there was no confidence in his words. "We checked before we came. This place is deserted." Another rustle. This time, it was unmistakable. Something was moving through the trees, slowly, deliberately. I felt a chill run down my spine, and every instinct screamed at me to run, to get away from whatever was watching us. But where could we go? We were trapped on this island, miles from the mainland, with no way off until morning. "We should go check it out," Matt said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Are you insane?" Lily replied, her voice rising in panic. "We're not going out there." "We can't just sit here," Matt insisted. "What if it's an animal or..." "It's not an animal," I interrupted, my voice firm. "I saw someone." "I know I did." We all stared at the dark line of trees, the fire between us and whatever was lurking in the shadows. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, and for a moment I thought I saw something move again, a figure just at the edge of the light, watching us. "I'm not going out there," Lily said, her voice shaky. "If something's watching us, it's better to stay together." "Yeah, let's just stay by the fire," Jason agreed, glancing uneasily at the woods. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The fire crackled, and the only sounds were the distant lapping of the waves against the shore. But the feeling of being watched never went away. I could feel it, a presence just beyond our sight, waiting for us to let our guard down. Then, without warning, the fire flickered wildly, and a gust of cold wind swept through the clearing, making the flames dance. We all froze, staring at the fire as it dimmed and sputtered, as if something was trying to extinguish it. "What the hell is happening?" Jason muttered, his voice tense. "I don't know," I whispered, my heart pounding. "But I don't like it." Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the trees, and this time it was much closer. We all jumped to our feet, backing away from the fire. The noise was coming from the direction where I had seen the figure. Whatever it was getting bolder. "Maybe we should get to the boat," Matt suggested, his voice tight with fear. We can leave, find somewhere else to stay for the night. Leave? In the dark? On the water? I asked, shaking my head. It's too dangerous. We'll have to wait until morning. Lily looked around, panic rising in her eyes. What if it's trying to scare us into the trees? What if it's waiting for us to run? The thought chilled me. What if that was the plan? To make us panic, to drive us into the darkness where it could get to us? We stay by the fire, I said, my voice firm. It's the safest place. We just have to get through the night. But as soon as the words left my mouth, the fire dimmed again, flickering as if something was trying to snuff it out. We all watched in horror as the flames sputtered and the clearing grew darker. We need more wood, Jason said, his voice strained. Yet the fire goes out. No way, Lily replied, her voice shaking. I'm not going into the woods. I'll go, Matt said, grabbing a flashlight. I'll stay close to the camp. I grabbed his arm, fear gripping me. Be careful. I will, he promised, and with that, he disappeared into the darkness, the beam of his flashlight bobbing as he moved toward the edge of the trees. The three of us stood by the fire, watching the flickering flames and listening to the sounds of the night. The wind rustled the leaves, but it felt wrong, like it was carrying something with it, something unseen. Do you think he'll be okay? Lily asked, her voice trembling. Before I could answer, I heard a faint rustle from the trees. I turned quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. Did you hear that? Jason nodded, his eyes wide with fear. Yeah, I did. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the forest, slow, deliberate, as if someone was walking toward us. My blood ran cold. It wasn't Matt. He had gone in the other direction. Who's there? Jason called out, his voice shaking. No answer. Matt? I shouted, but there was only silence. And then, from the shadows, I saw it, the figure, standing at the edge of the firelight, just watching us. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it wasn't Matt. It was taller, its shape distorted, and I could feel its eyes on us, cold and unblinking. Run! I screamed, grabbing Lily's hand and pulling her toward the tents. We sprinted toward the tents, the cold wind biting our skin as we ran. My heart pounded in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to get away, to put as much distance between us and that figure as possible. Lily's hand trembled in mine, her breathing ragged as we reached the small clearing where our tent stood. We can't stay here, she gasped, fear-laced in her voice. It's watching us. I know, I said, trying to catch my breath. But we have to find Matt. Jason came stumbling after us, his face pale and his eyes wide with terror. What the hell was that thing? He asked, his voice trembling. It didn't look human. I don't know, I admitted, glancing back toward the trees. But we need to stay together. Where's Matt? The firelight flickered faintly in the distance, casting eerie shadows across the trees, but there was no sign of Matt. The darkness pressed in around us, thick and suffocating, and the whispers returned, faint but unmistakable, carried on the cold wind. Leave the island. I heard it again, Lily whispered, her eyes darting around. Something's whispering to us. Jason shook his head, panic rising in his voice. We need to get off this island now. Who cares if it's dark? We have the boat. What about Matt? I argued. We can't leave him behind. Before anyone could respond, there was a sudden rustling sound from the trees, followed by the snap of twigs. My heart froze as I turned toward the noise, expecting the figure to emerge from the shadows. But instead, Matt came stumbling out of the forest, his flashlight clutched tightly in his hand, his face pale and covered in sweat. "Matt!" I shouted, rushing over to him. "Are you okay?" He shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. "Something's out there," he gasped, barely able to speak. "I saw it, following me. It wasn't human." Lily grabbed his arm, her voice trembling. "What did you see?" Matt took a shaky breath, trying to compose himself. "It was tall, too tall. And its face. I don't know if it even had a face. It was watching me the whole time." "We need to get to the boat," Jason said, urgency flooding his voice. "We can't stay here. It's not safe." I looked around at my friends, their faces pale with fear, and I knew Jason was right. Whatever was on this island, it wasn't going to let us leave easily. "Grab whatever you can," I said, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. "We're leaving." We hurriedly packed up our gear, our hands shaking as we stuffed everything into our bags. The fire had almost completely died out, leaving us in near total darkness. The whispers grew louder, swirling around us like a cold wind. "You shouldn't have come here." As we made our way toward the beach, the feeling of being watched intensified. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of fear through me. I could sense the presence moving with us, just beyond the tree line, following our every step. "There's the boat," Jason shouted, pointing toward the shore. Relief surged through me as I saw the small boat waiting for us, bobbing gently in the water. We quickened our pace, desperate to get off the island and away from whatever was stalking us. But as we reached the shore, I felt a cold rush of air sweep over me, and I knew we weren't alone. I glanced back toward the trees and saw the figure again, standing at the edge of the forest, watching us silently. It was closer now, its distorted shape barely visible in the dim light. "Get in the boat!" I screamed, pushing Lily toward the water. Jason and Matt were already untying the boat, their hands shaking as they fumbled with the ropes. "Hurry up!" I shouted, my heart racing. Lily and I scrambled into the boat, the cold water splashing against our legs as we shoved off from the shore. Jason and Matt jumped in after us, and we began to row, the island slowly fading behind us. But as we pushed further out to sea, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us. "Do you see it?" Lily whispered, her eyes fixed on the shore. I turned and looked back toward the island, and there it was, the figure, standing on the beach, watching us with those cold, empty eyes. Even from this distance, I could feel its gaze, like a weight pressing down on me. "We're getting away," Jason muttered, his voice shaking. "We're safe now." But I wasn't so sure. The whispers had followed us out onto the water, growing fainter but still there, carried on the wind. "You'll never leave," they echoed, sending chills down my spine. As we rowed further away from the island, the figure remained on the shore, never moving, never blinking. The cold air hung heavy around us, and I couldn't help but wonder if we had truly escaped or if we had brought something with us. The night was silent except for the rhythmic splash of the oars and the distant hum of the wind. But the fear never left me. Even as the island faded into the distance, I knew the memories of that place would haunt me forever. We had left the island, but something had followed us, something unseen and unknown. And as I sat there in the boat, surrounded by my friends, I realized with a sinking feeling that we were not alone. hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.